Author G.D. Spilsbury reads her essay, Remembering Margaret Fuller, from a novelist's point of view.
Those of us who feel a passion for Margaret Fuller's life, 1810 to 1850, experience amazement that her name isn't a household word in the United States, or even in her hometown Boston, where other luminaries of her day, of her circle, including another woman, continue to be local and national icons. Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Louisa May Alcott, and Nathaniel Hawthorne. The suffragettes, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who carried Margaret's torch in their effort for female equality, are also well known. Margaret, though, whose working life was so rich, is mostly known to those who rediscover her, a community that steadily grows, including in Rome, Italy, where public signage honors her as an American journalist who took part in the country's 1849 War of Independence and short-lived Roman Republic. Margaret's dispatches sent from Rome for Horace Greeley's New York Daily Tribune form a rare foreigner's perspective on an important period in Italian history. I came of age during the feminist movement of the 1960s and 1970s, and I read Margaret Fuller's Woman in the 19th Century, 1845, which brought her fame at home and also among England and France's intelligentsia. When she traveled to Europe soon after the book's publication, as the first woman foreign correspondent for the Tribune, eminent writers' doors opened to her, those of Wordsworth, Carlyle, Mazzini, Sand, Mickiewicz, Manzoni, and others. At age 20, I found Margaret's book difficult to understand in some places, and decades later, when I rediscovered her in 2014, I still found some of the passages murky, the feminist argument deviating from what I felt was its intention. Margaret seemed to stop short of saying what she wanted, possibly because deep inside she feared society's opinion of her, or her own opinion of herself as a woman, what a woman should be, should say. At the same time, I related to that internal tug of war that wanted to state certain truths, but ran up against the wall of female shame. Shame for crossing a gender boundary. I had experienced this conflict myself, to the extent that the question of what is true femininity versus socially mandated femininity became an important focus of my short fiction and novels. What is gender's effect on relationships of any kind, from lovers to family to professionals? How does gender psychology affect relationships? If women, Margaret, myself, and others, had no societal indoctrination, including millennia of female traumatic experiences epigenetically compounded in us, what would we be like? Would we still put on slinky clothes, alluring makeup, and outer accoutrements like high heels to attract men? Is equality just an idea, a concept born of civilizing structures? Does it exist inherently in nature? Assuming male-female attraction exists in nature, then do we see in the animal kingdom female species doing anything beyond their biology to attract males? Do the male species put on displays or exert force to mate with their female targets? It's evident that the instinctual world isn't generally equal. Males dominate physically. Among humans, physical domination feeds general domination, leading to male-dominated communities, societies, and nations. The goal of gender equality, and any other equality, happens at the tip of today's westernized world in a lip-service way through legislation that doesn't change what's at the natural core of living beings, where physical strength means power, means the ability to force that power. I rediscovered Margaret Fuller when I read Hawthorne's Blithedale Romance, published in 1852. Midway through the story, the enigmatic and not always likable female protagonist, Zenobia, makes an impassioned speech to the narrator, Cloverdale. Her words struck me hard. They were real, heartfelt, full of grief, and true. As a fiction writer, I knew that a real woman, a living person, had once blurted those words to Hawthorne, no matter how much his imagination changed the setting, the character, and the plot as he dreamed up the scene. Standing before Cloverdale, Zenobia says, "Thus far, no woman in the world has ever once spoken out her whole heart and her whole mind. The mistrust and disapproval of the vast bulk of society throttles us, as with two gigantic hands at our throats. We mumble a few weak words and leave 1,000 better ones unsaid. You let us write a little, it is true, on a limited range of subjects. But the pen is not for woman. Her power is too natural and immediate. It is with the living voice alone that she can compel the world to recognize the light of her intellect and the depth of her heart." Hearing Zenobia's anger, frustration, and further on in the text, her threat of suicide to end the pain of being a woman, hit home in me. Immediately, I wanted to know who she was in real life. I wanted to read about that woman and bring her back to life in a fictional world, because in the 160 years since Hawthorne's scene, the fundamental roots of gender inequality had not changed. It turned out that Margaret Fuller was the leading source of inspiration for Hawthorne's Zenobia. And rereading Zenobia's speech, it becomes clear why I found some passages in her woman book a bit murky. For instance, that a woman can't speak out her whole heart without disapproval, or that she has to tone it down to be acceptable. It is this response to women's natural and immediate power that continues in our most advanced societies today, and likely in past and present indigenous communities where women enjoy honor for certain roles, such as healing or spiritual talents. I began reading books about Margaret Fuller, and also her letters, my imagination filling for a future novel about her. From the outset of this immersion, I learned about her tragic death in 1850 in a shipwreck on her return home to America from both war and personal traumas in Italy. The small ship Elizabeth ran aground just offshore from Fire Island, New York, and Margaret, her Italian partner or husband, Giovanni Angelo Ossoli, and their 2-year-old son, Nino, had to wait an entire violently storming day in the hopes of being rescued. People were on shore. Would they send a lifeboat in time? Minute by minute, hour by hour, the ship continued to splinter apart as ferocious wind and waves struck it. What did time feel like to those on deck? Finally, with the mast crashing down and no possible hope for survival, a crew member grabbed Margaret's baby and dove into the raging sea. The next waves swept those remaining on board away. It is this horrible, unfathomable ending to Margaret's life as a struggling intellectual woman that haunts those who discover her life. It is the key component that continues to draw new generations of scholars to comb her archives for new information and insights. Since the 1960s feminist movement that drew her out of obscurity, the Renaissance surrounding her life has not paused for a single day. Fullerites are everywhere, and the Internet has made their unification and sharing of papers, conferences, webinars, and new findings possible. In addition to academic works, creative initiatives pop up every year, such as the recent documentary by Jonathan Schwartz and Peter Riley titled Margaret Fuller, and newsletters, websites, and journals dedicated to or inspired by Fuller, such as Symposium, an online journal of current voices and views in the tradition of Emerson and Fuller's The Dial. But to the general public, Margaret Fuller's name rings no bell. As a fiction writer, my search for Margaret has not been chiefly biographical. It has been a search for her soul, her inner life, and awareness of a woman's gender pain, particularly during her 2 years in Rome, when her familial and social conditioning were already formed in her, and her new experiences added yet another layer to that female history, a history of millennia. I asked myself, what was Margaret feeling during those critical moments in her personal life that required untold human fortitude? What went on in her head when she settled in Rome alone and faced a foreign world of other languages and cultures? How was it to make her single woman way with a brave exterior? She had to earn her keep through her wit and abilities, and writing articles for the Tribune was not going to achieve that. She would need to publish more, particularly books, and she needed social connections for both her work and her longing to meet an eligible man with a similar, educated background. As a woman, Margaret shouldered many burdens that she never shirked. She was living alone in a world that frowned on quote-unquote spinsters, only recently considered an offensive label, as well as a world like ours today that dislikes women as smart as the smartest men. Margaret escaped some of this judgment because of her authorship and her prestigious newspaper job. Publishing gave her respectability and validation. Her book, Woman in the 19th Century, was known to Europe's intellectuals, and she could expect courteous reception. The Europe Margaret joined was also in the throes of popular unrest against royal oppression, and in countries like Poland and Italy, also against foreign domination. Not long after Margaret's arrival in Rome, the 1848 Spring of Nations erupted throughout Europe, widespread revolutions, including the one in Rome. Margaret became the planet's first-ever war correspondent. Her dispatches before, during, and after the short-lived Roman Republic, February to July 1849, are possibly her most important work, and they provided raw material for her unfinished history of Giuseppe Mazzini's doomed government for the people. Poland's most renowned poet and nationalist, Adam Mickiewicz, became friends with Margaret on a deeply personal level and urged her to fulfill her purpose of leadership, both for women's equality and for social causes generally. He also encouraged her to throw off the yoke of her virginity and enjoy her natural sensual side. Italy, he told her, was the perfect place to sample romance, for the Italians were a sensual people. Margaret listened to his advice. As a writer, I wondered what her ruminations were on freeing her sensual self. Well, in Rome, she was wholly independent, free to live as her true self. No one was watching. No one from home was there to judge her according to New England's morality. Even though her circle of friends around Boston, known as the Transcendentalists, were the era's progressives, their view of the ideal woman hadn't really changed. On the most basic and important level, women were still refused higher education. In Europe's upper-class circles of 1848, which were now Margaret's circles, women enjoyed more personal freedom. In Rome, on the verge of Mazzini's briefly successful campaign for independence from papal and foreign rule, Margaret was empowered. And yet, her impecunious state challenged her fullest capacity to act and was cause for constant stress that impacted her physical and mental health. After months of intense political work in Rome, she declared in her December 2, 1848, Tribune dispatch that she had the right skills to be an ambassador. Quote, "Another century, and I might ask to be made ambassador myself, but woman's day has not yet come." Unquote. People snickered at her for such bravado, including historians after her death and until the 1970s. But she had stated the truth. What perfect qualities Margaret Fuller owned for an effective political career, including handling nasty gossip about her non-female traits. She had the quality to deal with the world's inevitable detractors, much like our own female politicians today. What was it like inside Margaret's head to face each day with full awareness of being a highly qualified professional woman in a male-controlled world, far more male-controlled than today, to flinch with each personal attack or denial of access, but always carry on? As Margaret's followers today, we stand in awe, or rather, we stand up in ovation for her fortitude. Margaret's European women friends, Costanza Arconati Visconti and Cristina di Belgioioso, were free to live as they wanted, whether while still observing social conventions or not. They were aristocrats not consumed with worry about money, survival, and domestic responsibilities. George Sand, whom Fuller met and admired in Paris, was another well-born woman, free to pursue the life of her choosing. Margaret was well-born in Massachusetts and educated by her father to live a fulfilling life within the social restrictions imposed on women. But Margaret lacked a few ingredients important to women of her day that might have made that fulfilling life obtainable. She lacked conventional beauty and a certain feminine decorum or mystique that attracted the eligible men of her own intellectual ilk, men whose careers supported the family and the wife's ability to pursue her interests. Margaret was virtually penniless, another liability, not only for frustrating her full professional freedom, but also for posing a drawback to attracting eligible men. She had to work to support her large family after her father died. This responsibility meant she had little leftover time for her personal pursuits, such as her early goal to write a biography of Goethe, as well as the project at the time of her death, a history of the First Italian Revolution. Her lack of time and her inner distress over her thwarted dreams ranging from men, marriage, and family, to intellectual curiosity and output, added more anxiety to her daily life. Yet she strove on. Her innate, unstoppable talent drove her, and indeed, by age 40, when she died, her future was destined to be more secure, for she had established herself as a writer and a leader, a force, not only in the greater Western world, but more importantly, to herself. It may have helped that by that time she had a husband at her side, a visible convention met, as well as life's greatest love gift in her arms, her child, motherhood fulfilled. Margaret's future, returning to America, had a strong foundation, family and career potential. Friends and detractors who disapproved of her because of gossip and rumors would eventually forget what had bothered them. And if they didn't, Margaret would let it go, for such human behavior would always be part of both private and public life, and her destiny was already public life. The greatest blow to Margaret's exciting opportunities in Rome happened soon after she delved into the freer world awaiting her. The blow was also the kind that happens only to women. She got pregnant. Pregnancy out of wedlock was the greatest setback for a woman of her day, let alone a woman with the drive, purpose, and capability of Margaret. And yet, once again, true to her innate self, Margaret forced herself up to carry on and seek solutions. Giovanni Angelo Ossoli was 11 years younger, 27, with a beautiful face and dark, dreamy eyes. His good looks and romantic Italian mystique surely appealed to Margaret, and enough so that she allowed herself to experience her sensual side, supported by Mickiewicz's advice. She was safely far from home with its incumbent risks. Adding to Ossoli's appeal was his title. He was a marquis, something impressive, despite his lack of her own sophisticated education. His gentlemanly manners and presentation were enough for Desire to overcome her reservations. His lack of ready money, being the youngest son, probably didn't matter as well, for she wasn't thinking of marriage. Their intellectual spheres were too far apart. He might be an aristocrat, but frequented different social circles from her. In Margaret's shoes, I imagine the affair was of great stimulation to her. She now had the daily inspiration of a pending rendezvous with a handsome nobleman. And then, the initiation into sex and the anticipation of more of it was surely a powerful force. Margaret had little time for depression when she became pregnant. She had to act despite the dark abyss of her spirits. She needed to hide the pregnancy and the birth while finding a way for a Protestant to marry a Catholic, which was forbidden unless the couple received a papal dispensation. She had to find ways to support not just herself, but a family. She and Ossoli inevitably became closer, working on their dire situation together. Margaret moved out of town, first to Aquila, then to Rieti, ostensibly to write her book about Italy's independence movement. Angelo Eugene Philip Ossoli, nicknamed Nino or Angelino, was born September 5, 1848. Simultaneously, Mazzini's independence movement was gaining leverage in Rome, and Ossoli was part of the civic guard supporting it, complicating the couple's long-distance and financial communication. However, the dangerous political situation was a subject the couple shared and talked about, cementing an area of unity between them, besides their love of little Nino. It can be felt from their letters that love and respect grew between them during the pregnancy, the war, and later on in Florence as a family fleeing Rome. Within months of its establishment, Mazzini's Roman Republic fell under attack. Pope Pius IX changed his mind about supporting an independent Italy and fled Rome. He let French and Neapolitan allies declare war on Mazzini's fledgling state. Margaret left her infant son in the care of a hired nanny and returned to Rome. What grief she must have felt abandoning her baby only a few months after his birth. Why did she do it? What thoughts churned in her mind as she made that awful decision? What choices did she have, given the combination of her times and her situation? Was it money, sheer survival, that drove her back to Rome, where she could cover the war for the Tribune and thus pay for her son's care in Rieti and for her own sustenance in Rome? Giovanni Angelo's limited income couldn't cover costs for the three of them, at least not at this untimely juncture. The baby had to remain hidden because illegitimate. Until the couple found a way to marry, Margaret had to appear single. Complicating matters, Ossoli's share of the family estate was at stake, for if he married a Protestant without both the church and his family's approval, he would be disowned. If it wasn't because of dire need for money, did Margaret return to Rome out of her innate intellectual drive, her need to be in the center of history in the making, history wholly aligned to her own social and political beliefs? Did her work's importance supersede that of having her son within daily reach? Whatever reasons forced Margaret to choose returning to Rome, she could not lessen the grief and constant worry she carried inside for abandoning little Nino. Besides her wartime dispatches for the Tribune, Margaret supervised the Fate Bene Fratelli Hospital on the Tiber Island in central Rome. Every day she tended the mutilated and the dying, youth whom she imagined could be her own son or her partner Ossoli. The psychic blows bombarding her from 1848 to 1849 are hardly imaginable to the readers of her life today. Fortunately, she had several good American and foreign friends with whom to share her wartime experiences, if not her innermost secrets and grief. To Mickiewicz and the young American artist Thomas Hicks, she had earlier confided the predicament of her pregnancy, and she had asked Mickiewicz to be her son's godfather. When the revolution failed, and Margaret and Ossoli fled Rome as refugees of the defeated side, another devastation immediately struck their lives, the sight of their starved, despondent baby in Rieti. The nanny and her family had neglected him. Readers of this part of Margaret's story feel her horror and grief. Finding one's baby on the verge of death, emaciated and catatonic, all because of money and society's conventions, goes beyond comprehension. Yet Margaret Fuller carried on. She sought solutions and now had the support of a husband at her side. From this point on, they were Mr. and Mrs. Ossoli, though researchers have yet to find a record of their marriage. It may be that a sympathetic priest performed the marriage rite, believing that in extreme circumstances, such as war and fleeing refugees, this was the best that could be done. Perhaps Margaret and Giovanni Angelo decided that a priest presiding made the marriage rites authentic, church-sanctioned, and official documentation would have to be dealt with later. Or maybe they never had a chance to involve a priest in their commitment to each other. A time out in Florence gave the family a period of peace and recovery before embarking on their unknown future back in the United States. Rome was now in the hands of the enemy, and they could not return there in the near future. The family's financial straits meant crossing the Atlantic on a smaller ship, but the captain impressed Margaret as fully capable. Unfortunately, he died of smallpox before they left the Mediterranean, and worse, Nino also succumbed to the disease, though after a week on the brink of death, he recovered. Under the ship's second in command, the Ossolis crossed the ocean safely and were set to anchor in New Jersey the following day. But that night, a hurricane rapidly swept north and drove the boat off course until it struck a sandbar within 400 feet of Fire Island. There, through the storm's pounding wind, rain, and waves, they could see figures on the beach whom they hoped were arranging their rescue. But that was not the case. Those people were beachcombers waiting for valuables to wash up on shore. All day, with the boat splitting apart piece by piece, the small crew and passengers waited to be saved. Some sailors tied themselves to planks and made it to shore, where they tried unsuccessfully to organize a lifeboat to go back for the others. One has to imagine that in her last moments, with her baby in her arms, Margaret had decided this was the family's fate, to plunge into that vortex of waves and die together. Resignation to such a fate was the only way to face what was imminently going to happen, a most horrible, drowning death, and worse, the witnessing of her child's frantic struggle that was beyond her control. When the mast crashed down, finishing off the boat, the ship's steward grabbed Nino and dove into the sea. The next towering waves washed Margaret, Ossoli, and their young nanny into the water, the Ossolis never to be seen again. Nino is buried in the Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, at the foot of a memorial stone dedicated to his family, who perished together on July 19, 1850. The life of Margaret Fuller lives on in the hearts and minds of the women and men who study and honor her life and work. If today Margaret could gaze down on all the devotion her life stirs among those who remember her, she would surely take a deep breath of satisfaction. She might feel rewarded that her work for equality and for a more humane and just world has continued, and that her life as a 19th century woman bears an eternal flame.